Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, perhaps even good night, wherever you happen to be in the world. We welcome you to the webinar this afternoon, Hinduism and Discriminatory Experiences. My name is James Christie. I serve as the Ambassador at Large for the Canadian Multi-Faith Federation and have for many years been a member of the advisory board of the G20 Interfaith Forum Association and one of the early founders of the IF20's Anti-Racism Initiative. It is a delight to welcome all of you from wherever you may be this afternoon to be with us, and of course, a special delight to be presiding over an extraordinary panel, and I look forward to introducing them to you shortly. My longtime colleague, Rabbi Jordan Prosen in Toronto, was often fond of saying, before I speak, I'd like to say a few words. And this is no different an occasion. Here in the northern part of the North American continent, which indigenous peoples refer to as Turtle Island, we acknowledge always when we gather our presence on lands that for thousands, even 10,000s of years, have been stewarded by the First Nations of North America. And we acknowledge wherever we might find ourselves, certainly in Canada today and in the United States, to be standing on the grounds of those who have cared for and loved the land long before our ancestors arrived here from every part of the globe. So we express our respectful acknowledgement of the presence of Indigenous peoples and are delighted to be here on this territory and around the world in other communities this afternoon. It also is important for me to note the acknowledgements that are due, of course, to the board of advisors of the G20 Interfaith Forum, whose website is easily found, and to the chair, Audrey Kitagawa, and members of the Anti-Racism Initiative of the IF20. And I would also like to acknowledge the partnership, extensive partnership of the Canadian Multi-Faith Federation and of the Hindu Federation of Canada, of which Pandit Rupnath Sharma is president, and Ms. Thurm is a vice president of the latter. It is also important, I think, for us to note that this is rather a new experience for all of us. There are, according to the best source available, which is to say Google, 1.1, just shy perhaps, of 1.1 billion Hindus extant in the world. The majority, about 750 million, residing, of course, in the Indian subcontinent. However, there are therefore another 350 million Hindus scattered around the planet in various communities of sizes and organizational structure. Here in Canada, Hinduism is an increasingly present religious tradition and cultural tradition as well. And three of the countries which have received, since the end of the Second World War, a significant influx of the Hindu people are the Canada, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America. Hence, our participants today are drawn from those particular cultures and societies. Though the world has 1.1 billion Hindus, the knowledge of Hinduism outside of the Indian subcontinent is limited, to say the least. A couple of days ago, we marked the anniversary of the tragedy in New York of what we all know as 9/11. 21 years ago, we were shocked, appalled, our world turned upside down, bouleversé, as we say in the Canadian province of Quebec, by the actions that occurred at the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and in a remote field in Pennsylvania. The first casualty beyond the event itself was in New Jersey, and the gentleman involved was a Sikh gentleman, a turban-wearing or baptized Sikh, who was beaten to death by an angry mob on the assumption that he was an Arab. In fact, of course, being a Sikh, he was perhaps other, but not an other who had any responsibility in any way for the dramatic and terrible events that occurred in New York City. Similarly, we find an extraordinary ignorance on the part of many of us in the West in distinguishing Asian communities who are our citizens, our neighbors, our brothers, our sisters, if you will, from each other. Are you a Hindu? Are you a Sikh? Are you a Jain? Are you Buddhist? Are you Taoist? That is a challenge for a great many of us, perhaps not unreasonably, but certainly inexcusably in a post-pandemic world where one community seems to be, we hope, somewhat inevitable. I received a note yesterday from Dr. Richard Chambers of the Canadian Interfaith Conversation applauding this initiative and noting that in Canada, there has been far too little exposure for Canadians of historic European traditions to come to know their Sikh neighbors. And so we want to change that beginning today. In two recent webinars on anti-Semitism and on Islamophobia, the concentration was primarily on disasters and tragedies that have already occurred to the Jewish and Muslim communities worldwide. Our concern today is perhaps less with specific events that have occurred, but rather with, call it a preventative strategy, an opportunity for us to learn more so that we come to know our neighbors before too many of us engage in what can only be described as abuse and discrimination against our neighbors. To that end, we have developed an extraordinarily talented group of panelists from the United Kingdom, the United States, and Canada. It is my plan in a moment to introduce them briefly. As each of our panelists speaks, you will have some access to the chat because on the chat for information purposes will be posted the more fulsome biographies of each of them, and I encourage you to refer to those as they begin their talks. Our plan is to have each panelist speak for approximately 10 minutes, monitored, of course, and then we would like to take the opportunity to have a roundtable discussion or dialogue amongst our panelists. Following which, the Q&A box you will notice in the bottom of your screens will be available to you. And both I and my colleague, Jai Bansa, will be monitoring that, attempting to collate and group questions and doing our best to direct them to our panelists. If you wish to direct a question or comment to a specific panelist, please remember to do so. And there are no anonymous contributions to the Q&A, although the questions will be available only to the panelists, to myself, and to Jay. Following time for Q&A, we'll have a very brief wrap up and express once again our great appreciation to you for being here. To move then, without further ado, to our participants, I would like first to introduce Srimati Thushi Tiron. Thushi is a member of the House of Representatives within Canada of the operations of Nithyananda Meditation Academy. She is the Vice President of the Hindu Federation of Canada and is a recipient of Her Late Britannic Majesty's Platinum Jubilee Award. Thushi, we welcome you to the virtual podium.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Thushi Tiron. It's my great pleasure to be part of this webinar today. Thank you, G20 Interfaith Committee, for organizing this event. Certainly, the topic of Hinduism and discriminatory experience need to be discussed collectively to find best future for all of us. I'm a passionate Hindu, born and brought up in a Hindu tradition in Sri Lanka, and moved to Canada at young age due to the ethnic war and discrimination. I have had my education in engineering and have had a career history as a public servant in Canada for more than 25 plus years with various leading roles. Beside my education and career, due to my passion with Hinduism, I have worked with various Hindu organizations to contribute in the little much as I can possible to bring the awareness about the wealth of the tradition that the Hinduism offers, and mainly focusing on how to take the science to the next generation. And to further to any other information about my bio, you could refer to what is being projected. Go to the next slide, please. Third slide. Okay, so just starting the presentation, I would like to highlight the facts of what is the fundamental principle of Hinduism. Hinduism is rooted in the Advaita or oneness, the idea that all beings can live in peace and harmony, and also the all human beings are equal and divine. Each of them can reach their higher potential irrespective of their color, nationality, religion, gender, sexual orientation, caste, creed, or race. Even though Hinduism has a inclusive, adaptive, open architecture, over course of time it has faced wave after wave of discrimination in multiple forms, most lasting font is being through the medium of medias. Next slide, please. The Hinduism itself, even the source book, one of them is Bhagavad-Gita. It's a well-known source book of Hinduism. The chapter 4, verse 2, has already noted what is the phenomena that we will experience, which is yoga nashta paramdava, the supreme science thus received through the chain of master disciple succession, and the saintly king understood it in that way. In course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science it was appeared to be have been lost. Next slide, please. The open architecture of Hinduism. What it means, the open architecture in Hinduism, there are various source books which are called sutra. The original verse is the authoritative original source reference material. These verses should not be altered, edited, or deleted because these were revealed science through ancient rishis who have experienced the higher state of consciousness. From that state, they delivered these science to the world. But Hinduism had the methodology where it could be adapted by Bhashya, the commentary on sutras. Anybody who is learning the Hinduism, as they are mastering a scripture, they have the freedom to add commentary. Then on the commentary to commentary was also possible, Vartika and Tika. So these are all the fundamental framework Hinduism had thinking through. It could be adapted to the over the years to come. But the biggest issue that we see in today's age is when the Shastras are given commentary, particularly from people who have not been born and brought or experientially understood or living the science, just by their reading academics, they're adding translation to it. One such example is Maximilian translation for the traditional Hindu scriptures. Not only the non-Hindus, even Hindus, since it has been introduced through the academic world, taking this Bhashya as sutra itself. But as per Hinduism, all Hindus should reference the sutras when they are learning. Bhashyas, it's only interpretation of various other people of their own contribution and understanding. Next slide, please. Here is another example which comes from the Journal of Sanskrit Research. During the mistranslation of just two words, how the beauty and the accuracy of a ancient science is misinterpreted. This has happened because of, in certain languages, what are the words, vocabulary exist is predefined. Trying to translate with that limited sets of vocabulary with something which has been presented by very olden tradition, that is where this misinterpretation, mistranslation happens. Here in this particular example, due to the time, we won't be able to go through the detail of it, just the two words. In the actual meaning of Arya, which is translated as race, and Dasa, which is translated as slave. But according to the Hindu translation, one who speaks the language of Vedas is Arya, and disciple or servant of God is Dasa. So you could see how the beauty and the accuracy of the meaning get distorted by just direct translation. Next slide, please. So in today's world, that we see many different ideologies, thought currents are being presented in the whether it's the mainstream media, social media, describing Hinduism, which really doesn't have base truth to it, or even understanding about what real Hinduism is. So let's scroll through the slides due to the timing. Certainly, I want to highlight the recent incidents of swastika. So just to highlight, it's not just happening as of today, even as part of the Second World War, sacred symbol of Hinduism is being branded as the hate symbol, crooked cross. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is again the Varnashra Dharma, which is the core pillar of Hinduism. It's taken out of context and given the form of caste system. Caste system is not Varnashra Dharma. Unless this science is a living science, people would not be able to, including modern Hindus, will not be able to understand or celebrate the essence of it. Next slide, please. This is again one incident where the recent Kali poster in Canada has sparked quite a lot of rage and anger and sentiment towards among the Hindu community, where the goddess Kali was depicted in not in the way that Hindu worships her. Next slide, please. So what is the root cause for this misunderstanding, misinterpretation, misrepresentation is, even though this is a bit of a harsh word to call it, but it's the criminal negligence of Hindus. Hindus themselves, they are forgetting their inner software and made to believe Hinduism is only about enlightenment science, not able to understand or comprehend the whole aspects of various dimension of Hinduism. That is due to Hinduism is not a book tradition. It's a living science. Unless people live it, have a model community living the science, people will not be able to appreciate and carry forward these traditions. Next slide, please. So even though Hindus are negligent about preserving their tradition, wherever they settle down, all the diasporas, Hindu diasporas across the world, they're the pillar. Wherever they settle down, they're the pillars for contributing to the humanity in many, many ways. We could see on the next few slides where the research stats has shown Hindus are peaceful community, less divorce rate, higher income earners, intellectual capacity, what they have contributed over the education and science. It's um, it's quite a large contribution. Even the stats indicates how these Hindus, after even migrating to new countries, new environment, still continue to thrive and contribute.
Suchi, we thank you particularly for your contribution today, but must move on to our next speaker. And if you
Thank
will
you.
forgive me, um, we then move on to Dr. Jai Bansa, a scientist, author, community worker, and leader, and is the vice president, as you'll recall, of Education for the World Hindu Council of America. Jai, it is our pleasure to receive you to this virtual podium as our next speaker.
Thank you very much, James. Let me allow me to share my screen. Okay, wonderful. Namaste and greetings to everyone. It is really an honor to be speaking to you from this wonderful and important platform, for which I deeply thank the organization and the organizers of this forum. Here is a little bit of information about me. My contact information is here. If anyone wants to connect with me and have conversation about issues of common interest, feel free to do so. I really want to get to the context of my conversation, my part of the dialogue. So as our first panelist has eminently pointed out, Hindus and Hinduism itself are under a sustained and organized attack from many different directions, be it the academia, be it the entertainment industry, the news media, social media, or these organized syndicates. The attitudes that are being reflected in these attacks actually were formed and promulgated during the 1,000-year history of colonization of India. So it becomes necessary for us to, peek into that history a little bit, which is what I'm planning to do in the next few minutes. Okay, so this is a very high-level timeline of India's colonization history. You see, we are a civilization that goes back many thousands of years. We are a civilization that was knowledge-based and has made many seminal contributions to the world at large, be it in the area of philosophy, in mind sciences, in spirituality, in mathematics, cosmology, and so on and so forth, and yes, even human sexuality. But after a long period of prosperity and relative peace, we experienced two bouts of colonization. The first one, the Islamic colonization, and second one, the British colonization. Now, both were very brutal and both were extremely disruptive to our social order. If I were to describe each one of them with a single word each, I would call Islamic period as the genocidal, where 80 to 100 million of Hindus were massacred for the glory of the faith. And the British period as the ethnocidal, where we were forced to forget our roots, our civilizational roots. So I will, in this talk, I'll be focusing primarily on the British period because that is the latest one that is reflected in the attitudes of the world today. Okay, so question is, how did the British see Hindu society when they interacted with it for the first time? You see, the European worldview has been informed by the biblical ideas of something like mosaic race theory and doctrine of discovery. Now, these ideas informed the Europeans that they were a superior race by divine will, and therefore they were entitled to dispossess other races and force them into servitude. This is the mindset that James Mill, who was a historian for the British Empire, in 1819 wrote the book History of British India. And he uses these words. I will not read through all of them, but just a few. Imperfect, barbaric, savages, wild, and he finishes it with hardly different from monkeys. Now, what is the relevance of this book? See, this is the textbook that was used to prepare the young British officers who were going to be sent to India to lord over us. So, of course, they carried these attitudes and they acted accordingly. Now, I will relate 3 different incidents or policies of the British government that affected our civilization in a very, very significant way. The first one is the Indian education system and how it was manualed. So here is Thomas Munro. He was the governor of Madras Presidency. In 1826, he writes this report to the British government where he says, and I quote, mass education in the early 1800s was more advanced and widespread in India compared to England. And he goes on to say, every village had a school. But you see, colonizers have a problem. They are small in number and they have to control a large population who are educated and fairly sophisticated. Now they can use brute force, which they did, but they really had to change our mind, to confuse us, to make us hate the way we were, the way we thought, the way we looked, the way we ate, and the way we related to each other. And the weapon they used was the education system, the introduction of English education system in India. Here is here is Thomas Macaulay. He was responsible for the education policy of India for Britain. And here he is speaking in the British Parliament in 1835. Remember, a few years earlier, James Monroe had been singing praises of the Indian education system. And here he is looking to introduce English education. Why? Because to form a class of persons, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. And he goes on to say, no Hindu who has received an English education ever continues to be sincerely attached to his tradition. The man knew what he was talking about, because English education became a prerequisite for lucrative jobs, and it created an elite class automatically. Those who knew English were the haves, those who did not were the have-nots. The lack of proficiency in English language became a sign of backwardness. And those attitudes, unfortunately, continue today, even in the Indian society. And the elite class basically became attached to the British ruling class, and in fact became their loyal servants. Even today, they can be counted upon to carry on the narrative against the Hindu society because they got this really uprooted from their tradition. The next episode I want to quote is the discovery of Sanskrit by Europeans. So many European scholars were studying Sanskrit in the late 18th century, and William Jones was among the first ones who gained proficiency in this language, and he discovered its inner beauty. In 1784, he publishes this paper that became very popular, and he writes, the Sanskrit language is more perfect than the Greek, more copious than the Latin, and more exquisitely refined than either. So the attitude of the European Indologists is, well, these dark, backward heathens certainly could not have developed it. Let's find out who gave it to them. And they came up with these, ideas, the Aryan race theory and the Aryan invasion theory. What is this theory? They imagined a superior race called Aryan race, who came somewhere from Eastern Europe. They were white. They spoke Sanskrit. Part of them went to India, invaded India, pushed the locals, the backward locals to southern India, and mixed in with the tribal people and became what they became. And the other part came to Europe, and they were pure blood. They settled in Germany. Now, I would not litigate the validity of these ideas, but I think most of us know how these theories were used by a madman in the 20th century, Hitler, weaponized against the Jewish and the Roma people with devastating effect. However, most people do not know how it caused major dislocation to our civilizational history. It dissociated us from our ancestral language, our scriptural language, Sanskrit. Our opinions about Sanskrit no longer mattered. We were dissociated from the land of our ancestors, India, because, well, it had been invaded many times before. Therefore, it was okay for the colonizers to occupy it and continue to do so. And many other ways.
Bansal, I need to thank you very much and look forward to picking this up in just a short time in our roundtable discussion. But we'll need to draw this presentation to at least a temporary close and call on Dr. Lakshmi Vyas to join us now. And Dr. Vyas is the president of the Hindu Forum of Europe and a visiting professor at the American University of Sovereignty. She is sovereign national. She is the women's faith leader for Religions for Peace in Europe and is also the a leader of the Council of Religious Leaders in Europe. So Dr. Lakshmi Vyas, the floor is now yours.
Namaste to all of you. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Go to the third slide, please. Yes. Hinduism is one of the oldest religions of the world. Hindus are peace-loving people and they are not miscreants, but law-abiding citizens. The world around says the number of Hindu prisoners in jails, in fact, hardly any, is an example of their discipline and sincerity. Hindus have always recognized the role of family in nurturing children to become law-abiding, responsible citizens. The parents work hard to ensure that their children receive good education and acquire skills. So through hard work and enterprise, they can achieve economic sufficiency. Next slide, please. I'm terribly tortured by the fact that a lot of my brothers and sisters of the Vasudhaiva Kudumpakam is being discriminated, converted, and abused by vested interest, paid media, and paid organizations. Every time a Hindu girl is raped or tortured or discriminated, I feel the pain. I cannot close my eyes and dust it off. There are thousands like me among you and who are all listening. Why target the Hindu society? They are very well behaved. They are not troublemakers. They shine well in education and occupy prime positions in the world job market. I wonder if there is a collective agenda to attack the Hindus. Next page, next. Hindu minorities globally face several significant challenges and discrimination. The level, type, and severity of discrimination vary from country to country. Countries such as Bangladesh, Pakistan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Nepal, and Bhutan are main sufferers where Hindus are persecuted. Next slide, please. Today, I will talk a little bit on what is the reality. For example, let me go to the Oxford University and the case where one of the students was made to suffer a lot. So this is the student called Rashmi Samant, a small town girl from Udupi, Karnataka, was all excited about being elected the first Indian woman to be the president of prestigious Oxford University Students' Union. Samant, who ran her campaign on the decolonization and inclusivity platform, won the election. She made the headlines in India and across the world. All major Indian and diaspora news outlets proudly covered this news. 2 days later, however, it all fell apart. Samant had to resign amid allegations of racism, anti-Semitism, and transphobia. A few days later, Samant quit Oxford and was on her flight back to India after being bullied, threatened, and abused for her Hindu faith. Leading the charge against Samant was a staff member who still works in Oxford University, and he goes scot-free when all the trauma was faced by Samant. Next slide, please. Let's go to USA. A few days later, across the Atlantic Ocean, a group of college students was struggling with similar issue of discriminative attacks from a faculty member at Rutgers University. Her name is Audrey Truskay. The students represented by the Hindu Council, they are called as Yuva, had gathered to tell their stories of bullying, mental agony, and trauma to the university bosses. Truskay is well known for her anti-bigotry, vile discrimination, social media commentary, cyberbullying, and above all, a shoddy scholarship. Next slide, please. Almost 3 years ago, Truskay had tweeted that Mata Sita in Valmiki's Ramayana basically tells Bhagwan Rama that he is a misogynist pig and uncouth. She had also suggested that Bhagwan Lakshmana was lusting after Mata Sita. She tweeted an announcement of her extremely provocative new course, History of South Asia, Mughals to Modi. Nothing was done. She did not allow the festival of Holi to happen in the university. She tried to block the campus event on one of those Kashmiri Hindu plight where filmmaker Vivek Agnihotri was present. She was absolutely against anything Hindu that was done in the university. The sad news is the university authorities did not take any action against her, and the students continued to complain a number of times. So finally, someone apologized. I'm emphasizing the word someone. It's not the head of the institution or Truskay, it is someone, but Truskay goes ahead with her agenda. Slide 8, please. Hindu bashing. Be it graduation results, cricket match, or any progress that is made by Hindus, it is always attacked, trolled, and criticized. Showing Hindu gods on alcohol bottles, slippers, and underwears is the done thing. Somebody has to write to the embassy to cancel it. So this is the slide which shows the gods on slippers, underwears, beer bottles, etc. Go to the above one. Now here, this diagram shows that the Hindus in the jails are minimum in number. They come last. You can see they are only 6%. And similarly, the American prisoners by religion, you find the Hindus last, which shows that they actually do not do any crime or unnecessary battle or anything like that. Please go one above. So this is the criticism by the Hindu boys and Hindu community against why they are harassed. So it says, why do you make fear against us, etc., etc. One next, please. Yes, the next slide says, such discriminations are rampant against Hindus, Sikhs, and Buddhists. Basically, it applies to all dharmic religion. I can give numerous such examples. It happens every day in every corner of the world. So, I mean, we have to also defend it. How can we defend it? Learn how to respond to it. Sometimes hateful messages can also be spread by a real profile. In these cases, a direct response could be a more effective way to address the problem. As long as you do the right way, here are some few tips for it. Always challenge the message, never the person who spread it. Secondly, use facts and data to call out generalization and inaccuracies. Third point is display the harm of hate speech by showing a different perspective and share a good joke or anything positive note on this. Next, be polite in your reply. Don't become abusive yourself. Take a breath. Don't say anything you might regret later on. Fight the hate with offering a compliment back if you can stomach it. And lastly, use humor. It works. At the same time, there is the last advice to this is trolls and haters gain more confidence in their fellowship. For this reason, when confronting them, you should do the same. Get all your friends to report their profile as well as spread the word and build a network around you to feel empowered. Also, there are many organizations who actively counteract hate speech with online campaigns like Silence Hate, Don't Feed the Trolls, and Get the Trolls Out. When you need support, please contact them. And I would like to end it by this few words. We as Hindus have and will always remain committed to our guiding principle of Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam. The whole world is one family. The diversity of Hinduism is uniquely beautiful, and the principle of Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya means leading those benighted by ignorance to the light through education. So I pray such atrocities against the Hindus, the discrimination against Hindus, it ends as early as possible and peace prevails. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vyas. Today, the misinterpretation and potential interpretations for the positive from Tushi on the sacred texts of Hinduism. Jai has opened up to us some of the narrative history of Hindu experience for the last millennium, which is no small feat in a mere 10 minutes. And Dr. Vyas, you have placed in context some of the unhappiness experienced by Hindus in the United Kingdom and beyond. To wrap up the individual presentations, I will call upon Pandit Rupnath Sharma. Pandit Sharma is himself a religious and spiritual leader and a Hindu priest in the Greater Toronto area, serving the temple of Ram Mandir in the, what we call in Canada, the GTA or Greater Toronto area, particularly Mississauga, a community of some 5,000 members. And he is also president of both the Canadian Multi-Faith Federation and the Hindu Federation of Canada. Pandit Sharma, please wrap up for us, and then we will reconvene as a roundtable group.
Thank you, Dr. James. Namaste, everyone. I'm sure that the invaluable information shared by the previous speakers is going to take some time to be ingrained in our minds because there's so much of it. However, I would like to compliment all of them for the efforts made and to thank the IF20 board, whom I've been privileged to become a member of, that they entertained the idea of discussing discrimination against Hindus when I brought it to their attention, and to Audrey Kitagawa, the chair of the ARI, the anti-racist initiative, to actually mandate this, and here we are. So, slide please. Hindus and Hinduism have experienced discrimination for more than 1,000 years, has been confirmed in the presentation by the first speaker, Dr. Jai Bansa. And this has come as a result of, next slide, conquest and colonization, something you heard earlier also. Next slide. This discrimination persists today, and it's woven into the fabric of society under the guise of freedom of religion. I want us to pause for a minute. We all want freedom of religion and freedom of speech, but I do not believe that we want that freedom to be misinterpreted, that we must infuse our own ideas into the minds of others because we believe it's the right idea and then force it onto others. That is not freedom. There's a different term for that. But this freedom of religion that has woven into the fabric of modern day society hides the reality, and it opens a doorway and that orchestrates an approach of demonizing Hinduism and coercion of the believers. It gives those who are interested in changing the Hindu way of life an opportunity to say, hey, I'm talking about freedom of religion. I want to offer you this, ignoring what they already have. This process has well accepted a brand name that all of us are familiar with. Next slide, please. Conversion. And I'm not talking about currency here. I'm talking about people and their philosophy and their beliefs, taking them from what they are, as limited as it may seem to those who look at them, and trying to feed something new into their minds. Now, not only Hindus have suffered from this, colonization has brought this to most parts of the world, even here in Canada. The residential schools is a recent example of the thousands that were affected when one group of people thought they want to eradicate the belief and belief systems of one group and took children away from their homes and brought them to a stage whereby they suffered tremendously and continue to suffer. Next slide, please. Conversion is the most blatant act of discrimination that is practiced worldwide, with Hindus and Hinduism as a major target. I know from historic information that the Catholic Church and other Christian organizations have targeted India and Africa for converts. Numbers set as every year, these are the new converts, it should be this number. Of course, these information are not published to the public, but everyone who goes on a mission, who's a missionary of these faiths, have an objective to grow their congregation, and that growth is achieved through conversion of the natives. Next slide, please. What are the pains of this form of discrimination? It is so subtle and is taken for granted that, yes, you can convert, but I think little effort is made to analyze the pains or the aftermath of these activities. Next slide. Moral injury, destruction of family ties, desecration of holy places, fomenting rivalry and violence. Next slide, please. Conclusion. Major step in the eradication of discrimination against Hinduism is to enlighten the conversion specialists and people. I want you to know that there are people trained, and their entire life and objective is to meet those, in particular Hindus, and to tell them what they're believing is bunk and what they are offering is gold and heaven. And there are many better places than the way they are, and give them some food and some clothing, and maybe even give them money or even force them to believe in another way. We need to enlighten these conversion specialists of the reality that their way is not the only way. That brings me to the end of my presentation. And I hand it over back to you.
All things considered, that was a most comprehensive overview of the current state of 15% of the world's population. And I know I have appreciated this enormously, and I have an idea from the number of participants and the number of questions and comments that are coming in through the Q&A box that a significant number of our audience, our participants today are extremely interested in how we have been doing. We are going to move on to a roundtable discussion, and I'm going to ask a question to whoever has their hands on the fingers of the structure of the day. Is it possible, friends, to move us into a situation where the screen includes our four panelists and me as moderator, so that we might spend about 15 minutes in conversation with one another? Well, again, on behalf of all of us scattered across the planet, but particularly in the three extraordinary and very complex nations of the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada, for this remarkable afternoon. I am familiar with nothing like it ever having been hosted before, and I consider it an enormous privilege and a great pleasure to have been able to serve as your moderator, and hopefully was at least reasonably gentle in reminding you of the time constraints that we're dealing with. But we have 15 minutes where, as people in the pugilistic arts say, the gloves are off, and we can talk to and amongst one another. And if I may, I'd like to begin this off by putting a question to you. If it is unique in the circles in which I move to have had an afternoon like this, what is your response now that you have had an opportunity to address a not insignificant number of people, and as the weeks unfold and people turn to our webinar archive, many others will also experience this. Can you give me a sense of how it feels to you, what it seems to you after we have spent this hour and change together? Anyone who likes.
Yeah, perhaps I can go. Pandit, you want to go first? Looks like you had your hand out first.
Okay,
we're all three racing for the button. Go ahead, Jai.
First of all, I'm excited that this has happened. I remember when I brought this idea up to the board, I was hesitant they may not be interested, but I'm pleased to say that their response is positive, and here we are. But the realities of all of this is that this is only a drop in the bucket of the effort that has to be made to educate the world and to educate ourselves on that how we have been discriminated, and we must not be taken for granted. It is time for us to stop. It is time for change. It is time for the rest of the world to recognize that 1.2 billion people can't be doing such a bad thing in believing what they believe. And we need to recognize how much they've offered to the world and how much they continue to offer to the world. And we need to have more of these sessions and to engage a wider demographics of people and get it global, because the job has just started. Thank you.
Yeah, I would certainly second Panditji's comments. I think it's very refreshing to have a platform like this where we can reach out to a very broad cross-section of the world and put our views in front of them. For too long, we have been denied access to, we've been silenced. Even the conferences that take place on, my religion, my belief system, are typically, all populated by, Western so-called scholars, Indologists, and many of our people, our views are not considered to be relevant because they're considered to be biased. So it's really important to have a free-flowing conversation like this where we can, come out and put our views unfiltered and, in front of a broad audience. But as Panditji said, it's really a it's really a start. It's a drop in the bucket. We have to, do more of this and make people understand where we're coming from. We are very, hugely contributing, segment of the society. Anyway, I'll stop there and I'll let Tushi go next, and then we'll carry on.
Yes, thank you. Certainly, it's a great pleasure. It's a great start for having such a discussion in a global level. In a globalized community as we now live, there are many challenges every society is facing, starting from the environment, the social justice issues, inequalities, all of these that we see. From me, what I'm discovering Hinduism, even though I was a born and brought up Hindu, but discovering the depth of Hinduism, what makes me to feel is there is a lot of contribution that can be done to today's challenges of the world. So this forum, I'm not only seeing it as uh, bringing out the discriminatory experiences, and also it's a chance for even for the modern Hindus to understand what is Hinduism, what it has for the world to in terms of contribution. So it's a great start, as Panditji put together. It's just the beginning. So there's many more such events I hope would happen where we will be able to understand the depth of Hinduism. Thank you.
Thank you, Tushi. Lakshmi, have you anything you would like to contribute? And then I see Pandit Sharma would like to have another intervention.
Yes, in almost all the countries of the world, there are some Hindus or the other working or in job or doing a lot of hard work. And as I mentioned before in my talk, you will see that there are very few prisoners in the jails in all the countries of the world. They are minimum in number. That itself shows that we are law-abiding citizens. So my question or my worry is, why is this Hindu bashing is going around? Why there is so much of discrimination against Hindus? So this is what worries me. So I think we just by bending yourself and just by keeping quiet, it doesn't work. I think we all have to get together and send this report probably to the government or to the some agencies which look after the peace, etc., and either to Human Rights Association, etc. And we should ask why there is no benefit or solution given to this Hindu bashing that is happening all around. This is my question, as well as a sort of an advice to whoever is listening. Let's work together.
Pandit Sharma, I think you wanted to interject.
Yeah. I'm responding to a question that's posted by Cole Durham. The question reads, how do you distinguish illegitimate coercive conversion from legitimate efforts? For example, the webinar today shares ideas and was not coercive. How do you define the boundary between illegitimate coercion and legitimate persuasion? I am happy to answer that. I'm glad you asked the question. I went to school, Christian schools, because it was the only school available to us. We were a colonial British colony. And if you didn't go to an English school and learn English, you wouldn't have a future. While I was there, I had to go to Mass every so often and go to Mass on Wednesdays. I studied Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John because scripture was a requirement of passing for you to get an academic study. And my father was a Hindu priest. I got up every morning and I went to the temple. I did my puja and rituals. I dressed like I'm here right now. Then I changed my clothes and go to the English school, as I said, the Englishman's school. And then when we went to Mass, the chaplain or the pastor would get up and put it and say, Christ is the only way. And if you don't believe, you're a heathen and you will go to hell. I don't know if I'm doing a good job of it, but that's about the way he went. And then one day at the age of about 11 or 12, I got very bold and I said, Father, can I have a word, please? And he said, yes, yes, Ruth, sit down. Well, how can I help you? And I said, Father, how old is this Christ fellow? How long? He said, well, 2,000 years. I said, did anybody go to heaven before that? And there was pause. And we didn't chat for a long time after that. My father was complained that I'm a rude child. And I got a good whipping from my father for being rude to the priest. Yes. I don't know. My intentions were innocence. What the priest's intention was, he had a mandate to convince me without any effort and disregarding totally who I am and where I've come from. Although he had the ability to know all of that, he ignored it, trying to convince me of something else. I would say this is how I would answer that question. I hope it's satisfactory. Thank you.
Thank you, Pundit. Just before we move on, could I please invite participants to place their questions in the Q&A box rather than in the chat? The chat actually should have been disabled for questions, and it becomes very confusing to try to follow it when we have more sources than one. So please do direct whatever questions you wish to the Q&A box, and we'll try and address them after this more roundtable opening. I'm not sure, Jai, were you looking to make a comment?
Yeah, I was. Thank you. So I wanted to actually point to an interesting dilemma that Hindu community itself faces. You see, many of us came to the West, in the 60s, starting in 1960s. So our community is roughly 50 years, 50, 55 years in these countries. And we came with, excellent education. We've done financially very well, as one of the panelists pointed out. And, successful businessmen and professional spaces and so on and so forth. So many of our own numbers do not feel that there is actually a discrimination against, against the Hindus. They do not see in the professional spaces. The problem is, they probably do not know what is being taught to their children in the school. They probably do not see what is being, how the community is being talked about in the news media and social media, and how that, those voices rise to a crescendo and actually building a hateful atmosphere for the Hindu community in these places. And that's reflected in a lot of the incidents that we are seeing around Canada, United States, and many other places where temples are being attacked, people are being attacked verbally, and so on and so forth. So this is something that actually Hindu community has a very serious challenge. On one side, very successful professionally. On the other side, there is this hateful narrative that's being, that's going around them, and they do not seem to connect.
Well, thank you very much. It's not entirely on topic, but related is a question of personal interest, having for many years offered courses in my university on science and religion. They tended to be, for the most part, in the context of the Abrahamic traditions, which is one of the challenges that we hope this afternoon will address, recognizing that there are at least 7 great world religions and indigenous spirituality of various expressions around the planet. And in the West, we tend to concentrate on Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. One of the things that fascinates me in that field is, well, even looking at the biographies of our panelists today, there is a clear intersection between interest in the scientific endeavor or scientific project and the religious project, as secularists take it. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that. Why does it seem that Islam to a degree and Hinduism to an even greater degree in purely anecdotal terms is so happy, if you like, so comfortable with engaging in both the scientific and religious quests? to anyone.
So one of the things that I see is, you see, if you actually look at our bios, you know, all of us have science background. Very few who actually publicly speak on Hindu issues come from the social sciences or humanities background, from the Hindu guys, you know, from the Hindu community. And the reason is our voice has been actually in those spaces has been suppressed for a long time. And in the you know, the STEM spaces, you know, we are relatively safe because those are fairly secular spaces, and we've done very well. But when we get our, you know, so we have to educate ourselves, you know, with a science background. Eventually, you know, when we come back to our roots, to our civilization roots, we have to educate ourselves a little bit so that we can speak out in these, you know, in the conversations like this. But it's you will find very few people from the Hindu diaspora or from the Hindu community at large coming from the social sciences or you know, theological backgrounds in these places, simply because we have not been given a seat at the table, and that continues to be denied to us to this very day.
Well, thank you for that very candid response. The icons are flashing up thick and fast, so you'll excuse, I hope, my slightly arbitrary approach to this. But Lakshmi, I'll turn to you next, and then to Pandit, and then to Tushi.
Yes, I was just looking at the QA section, and there were a couple of questions from Balasubramaniam, Neha, Gupta, Edmund, and Jyotsna. And I appreciate all your questions. Some of them I have answered there. Yes, I think it is youth who have to play a very important role. You have to take it forward from all of us, and you are more responsible to get this Hinduism together than more than we've been working. Now it is youth. I'm passing on to all of you, and please do not hesitate to contact us or, you know, take help from all of us. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Lakshmi. Pandit.
Well, there's an action plan from the guests. We are going to formulate an action plan after this, not only with the ARI, but outside of the ARI and the IF20. The Hindu community under the auspices of the Hindu Federation does have a mandate to continue to educate, and we will foster that and want to work internationally with all of our colleagues around the world. But on the question that you posed, Dr. Christie, I think it's important to understand that science has always been embedded in the Hindu way of life. All of our scriptures, especially the not Upanishad, but the Vedas, are not books of just prayers. They're books that expands and explores man's relationship to nature and talks about creation. How the universe is created is already described in the Vedas. In the Bhagavatam, in the Shiv Puran, there is chapters upon chapter of how the world was formed and how elements of nature, all of the elements of nature, contribute to the existence of humanity. And that is why Hindus see God is everything and everything is God. And science, quote unquote, has always been a part of Hinduism and the way of life. But the people who have gone out in the academic world and became scientists and so on, yes, they follow that stream, but they're not removed from the Hinduism. But as Dr. Bansal said, these people rarely get a seat at the table to have a discussion. And the ones who are into the faith sector, who are not in tune to the modern day scientists, are not willing to come out and sit in these dialogues. And as such, we have this challenge of who will represent us. So here we are, and I'm so proud that many of the people who are in the professional arena of the world are getting involved in the faith arena so that we can combine our professional skills and our religious skills to represent ourselves.
Well, thank you, Pandit. And Tushi.
Yes. So one thing that I like to add is, like Einstein said, where the religion stops, where the science stops, the religion starts. So, as per the Hindu tradition, anybody who was born and brought up with this tradition has the highest ability to cognize and understand the external world of the reality. So, most of them certainly pursue through science and various other higher academic challenges. But when they explore through this, I'm just putting it from my personal experiences. When you just go through this fundamental teachings and understanding, you have a natural inquisity to find out more of the understanding of your inner identity or more your inner world. The science may have only grown to measure, understand, collaborate outer reality. But the Hinduism prescribes or gives the ability to explore your inner identity. So that is where I'm seeing it as it goes hand in hand. One is the extension of the other. So that is what I would like to add.
Well, thank you, Tushi. You know, I could quite cheerfully monopolize the balance of the time we have together asking questions of my own, but that hardly seems to live up to the promises that we made at the beginning. So I would like to turn now to Jay's work in consolidating some of the questions that we've been receiving, but we'll also go through the Q&A as well so that he and I together can have a reasonably comprehensive interpretation of the engagement of our participants. One of the questions that has come in is going to be impossible to answer, so I'll therefore ask it first. Because there may be some creative advice that can come from the four of you. The question is, and this is from Suresh Lohia, what would be the outcome or recommendation of this, I believe, this panel or this kind of study to the, would be to the IF20, through the IF20 to the G20, the group of 20 nations, world leaders, and some form of action plan ongoing. Now, in a technical sense, that is, as my longtime colleagues in the American military say, well above our pay grade. But in terms of advice and thoughts from the Hindu community, I think we'd all be all benefit from hearing what your thoughts are on that. What might be the course of action or a course of action for the ARI and the IF20? And I'm going to arbitrarily ask Pundit if he'll respond to this first, because he sits on the board, in fact, of both the ARI and the advisory board of the IF20 itself. Pundit, would you give a start?
I'd be happy to. I think with the G20 coming up and will be in India, am I correct? In
2023.
I believe that I will do everything within my power to encourage, as far as the recommendation, that a greater emphasis is placed on recognizing all religions of the world, and to make sure that Hinduism is at the table and that it's given the recognition it deserves, not because there are 1.2 billion people, but because it is a genuine, sincere, meaningful, and can contribute tremendously to the betterment of society across the globe. And as such, it must be looked at, it must be understood, more reverence must be given to it, and others must step back and ask themselves a question. Whenever we try to convert someone, did you take a moment to understand where they are, where they're coming from, and what do they believe in? Or are you only bent on convincing them of what you believe in?
Okay. Thank you very much. And then open, of course, to the balance of the panelists. So may I elicit your thoughts?
Dr. Christie, if I may, I think this is a fine start, but it's again, what we said earlier, drop in the bucket. I think one of the recommendations would be to carry on this dialogue. Have more opportunities to kind of explore, our place in the world, our contributions, and just to sort of break those, what I consider interfacial, resistances and frictions. So just more familiarity with who we are, what we do, where we come from, what our belief system is, with the society at large, I think that dialogue is going to be very useful in itself. Beyond that, where it goes, I think, once we break those boundaries, we learn to, talk to each other. I think that in itself is going to be a big contribution, in my opinion.
Thank you. And any of our other panelists wish to respond specifically to this question?
Yes, certainly. So certainly I do resonate with Pandit Ji and JD, what they have said already. I certainly feel that there need to be more forums, more open discussions about what Hindus are going through, what is real Hinduism is. So it's about bringing the right awareness about Hinduism is where we should be focusing more so that it can be contributing to humanity at large.
Okay. Well, thank you. There's an interesting question here from Regini Sharma. And I put this to any of the panelists, actually. And with just a moment of background, we have been several months in the planning of this particular session. And during it, we had a number, during the planning, we had a number of conversations about whether we were speaking about Hindu phobia in the manner of the Islamophobia that has become so an epidemic in its proportions since 9/11, 21 years ago, or anti-Semitism, which seems to be almost a strange hybrid of fear and loathing, tragically enough. But within the planning for this, the conclusion was that we weren't so much talking about Hindu phobia. As Dr. Vyas has pointed out, Hindus tend to be pretty people who color within the lines, to use a North American expression. People who by and large are, well, frankly, good, solid citizens. So the term Hindu phobia seemed to be not quite so applicable, which is why we drifted towards discrimination. But let me bring that question from the planning back into this context to address the question of what are the roots of Hinduphobia, and the note that it hasn't really been explained. So I need to turn that, I think, back to our panelists.
So phobia is, by definition, fear of something. And Hindus have never done anything, to my knowledge, and there is, history is open to everyone to read, that should cause anyone to fear them. As Dr. Vyas has pointed out, they are law-abiding citizens. They are contributing citizens to society. So we've been struggling with this issue of, what we should be calling the phenomenon that we're experiencing today. And I ran into that dilemma 2 years ago when we were, I was trying to form a team to talk about this and write about this issue, and we decided to call it Hindu Dvesha. Now, Dvesha is it doesn't roll off your tongue that easily, but it means it's a Sanskrit word that means aversion, hate, and all those negative sentiments that that you can think of. But phobia is an easy one because Islamophobia has been around and it's become been popularized. So I think a lot of Hindus just felt comfortable with calling it Hinduphobia. The reality is it is not, and we're building an ecosystem around this new term called Hindu Dvesha. Some people also call it Hindumisia, but Hindu Dvesha is. I know in the North American context, Sanskrit is not exactly their mother tongue, so it's a little bit difficult for them to grasp the inner meaning of it. But it really, I believe, describes the phenomenon and experience that we are having today.
Okay. And other panelists, any desire to respond in the wake of Jai's observations?
I think the whole question of Hinduphobia, as Jay has pointed out, it is, in my mind, I do not believe that there's any reasons not evident in the media or anywhere where the world in general be afraid of Hindus. And that is why I was very strong against using that term in this discussion. I definitely agree that we have issues whereby we are being treated differently in a discriminatory way, and maybe for no good reasons. And I think it's out of ignorance. Or I would like to say that, he who tells a story creates the culture. And the stories that were told about Hinduism since the beginning of colonization has been told by those who are not Hindus. And as was pointed out by Dr. Bansal in his presentation, there were those who were pro and con, there were negative and positive reviews of Hindus. And as such, that's what spread to the world. And the power to be at the time was telling the story. And as such, that story, that narrative permeated down to society. And as such, we were given a bad name. And I think what Tushi talked about, Ari and Das, the term translated to servant and servitude. Like if I were to say you're a civil servant, does that mean you're a slave? So, I mean, it's an interpretation, and that was taken out of context and maybe became very, very aggressive, that, and used out of context. So we are victims of terminologies changing over the year. I remember a time when you said certain words and they meant certain things, and today we say the same words, they'll mean totally different things. It's because our mentality and society around us has changed. And we, the Hindus, are dealing with an evolving society, but we still maintain our strength and our belief system, and taking from the information historically that Jay presented. All of history has proven any society that has been dominated by another culture for over 1,000 years have been totally eradicated. And what has happened in Hinduism? Although we were oppressed, suppressed, and dominated and ruled over, Hinduism still stands very tall today, and we are still adaptable to all that comes. And for that, we must be very proud. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Pandit. I'm going to ask Lakshmi to make a contribution. I noticed her indicating that she would like to. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, James. Just I again want to, I didn't use the word Hindoophobia, but since it has come, I would very much like to say that whatever good things happen, it could be a graduation result or winning a cricket match or any progress that is made by Hindus, there's always people to pull them back. So what happens is a very good example that we experienced a couple of weeks ago is the cricket match which was held in UK, in Birmingham, and how the winning, of course, India lost. The winning of the other team promoted a big morcha and a strike, and a lot of troubles were created in a place called Leicester in UK, and it went on for 7 days. Actually, a small PowerPoint presentation, I had sent it to Jay to show it day by day. The reports were given how they were harmonizing, they're coming together and burning the houses, hitting the people, throwing stones in the windows, and all this nonsense was happening in UK, in Leicester. So, I cannot understand what is the reason to hit the Hindus or to attack the Hindus. So, what do they put their God's picture, etc., in underwears and slippers and things like that? Why do they do only for Hindu? So this is what is Hindu, phobia, and they just want to punish us or harass us, and I'm sure the media plays a very important role here. And there are several organizations who pay the media to give such reports, sensational reports. And I'm sure there is a lot of people who are involved. I don't want to say it very openly, but there are countries involved, some people, groups involved, and they are doing something like this. So we need to really send this report, whatever report we make from this discussion, this report should go to the Human Rights Office, and from there we should get some sort of a relief. religious freedom or something of relief we should ask for.
Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Lakshmi. I'm going to ask Dr. Bansal to give us the second to last word this afternoon. The last word I shall reserve for myself. Jai, we're actually out of time, but I would love to have our participants know your closing thoughts.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, so there are a lot of misinterpretations that I think someone earlier was talking about. Some of our ideas have been misinterpreted, and I had to cut my presentation short. But the one point that I wanted to make was about the caste system. I mean, if anyone in the world knows about Hindus, the first thing that comes to mind is the caste system. There's they believe in caste, they believe in stratification, and so on and so forth. And that was the point I really wanted to make. It'll take me forever to explain the actual social structure that Hindus were organized in. It's called a Varna Jati system, which is based on your tendencies and your skills. If you're an intellectual, you have a certain role in society. If you are soldier, you have a certain role. If you are a business person, you have a certain different role. And if you're a service person, you have a different role. That's sort of how the society was divided, and it was very flexible and so on and so forth. But it's been, it is not even known to most people, and probably not even to a lot of Hindus, that the system that we are familiar with today, the caste system, was actually introduced by a fellow named Herbert Risley, who was the superintendent of ethnography and Census Bureau in the British Empire. In 1871, for the first time, he introduced this taxonomy that he created and a nasal index that he used for, to put people in different classes. 50 years later, another superintendent of police said, we actually did it, and we are now castigating the system, but we are actually responsible for creating the caste system. It's all in my presentation. I'd love to have you share it on your website. So we are not aware of where some of these things came from.
Well, thank you, Jai. This has been a stimulating, fascinating, and sobering experience, I think, for many of us who are not ourselves within the Hindu tradition, or even those of us who, though tangentially, have some regular communication and engagement with the Hindu community in our respective countries. Really, all that remains is to reiterate thank yous. Thank you to all of our extraordinarily gifted, skilled, and experienced panelists. A thank you, as Pandit Sharma has mentioned, to Audrey Kitagawa, not only through the anti-racism initiative of the IF20, but to her technical team that has been working with us and rehearsing us so that we could exercise these complex new worlds or travel through these complex new worlds with some degree of effectiveness. I want to thank all of you as well, our participants this afternoon. We were up to over 100 people, and I know that there will be details for you to contact the G20 Interfaith Forum. In fact, if you simply go to any browser and type in G20 Interfaith Forum Association or simply IF20, you'll find us. And we hope that this will be an ongoing element and a significant element of our commitment to building and fostering and nurturing dialogue, not only amongst Hindus and other religious communities, but frankly, throughout the entire global village. Our deep appreciation to everyone who made today possible, who supported and sustained it, and as I say, to all of you, wherever you may be on the planet, who have joined with us. May God bless and keep you all. Namaste.